So to everyone here, thank you for joining us tonight. We greatly appreciate your time and your contributions on this topic. I am the city's Climate Protection Program Manager. I've been with the city for coming up on 10 years now, which is a pretty wild milestone to be approaching. Over that time period, we've done a variety of different things, which I'll talk a little bit more about our programs later on. But for right now, sorry, my cat is passing through. To get us started tonight, I just wanted to say that the topic of vulnerability assessment, any sort of risk assessment, there's can be some technical language when we're like looking at kind of the methodology and the protocols for putting these together. But really what it all comes down to is what local knowledge is. So the things that you all are aware of in our community as we experience extreme weather events, the sort of things where there's gaps, where there's opportunities for improvement, especially if we're looking at changing effects from climate change. The best way that we can start putting together our adaptation planning is to have that local experience, that local knowledge, point us in the right direction. So we're really grateful for your all's time and attention tonight and your contributions for this. That will then set us up in a really great place to focus and structure our efforts around adaptation planning.
Great. Thank you, Susan. So our focus tonight is really about what we can do and think about and recognize around climate adaptation, which starts with the climate vulnerability assessment. And so as we're talking, you might have ideas, and we'd like to encourage you to use the chat function in Zoom. So if everyone can find that chat function, you should be able to see it if you mouse over your screen, and you'll see where it says chat. Very good. And you can go ahead and type anything you want in there just to practice. In particular, as we think about it, is there anything in specific that you feel needs some protection from different hazards that can happen from climate changes? And so you can enter something like that in the chat right now, but I would like you to feel free to use that chat function throughout our 2 hours together, even when we're in the breakout rooms. And so when we're hearing from one person, you may have a thought based on what they're talking about. Go ahead and put that thought into the chat. So we're looking in particular from you, any thoughts you have, any ideas you have, or any questions you have about climate vulnerabilities here in the city of Charlottesville. Great. So we have our facilitation team here with us, and myself, I'm Linda Warren from Launch Consulting, and we're a small women-owned business located here in Charlottesville. And with me, you'll see Megan Tenhoff and Cece Atkinson, as well as Caitlin Morris and Denise Nelson. So these are our facilitators who will join you when we get into the breakout rooms and be able to help. You'll also notice something about our backgrounds. So we don't have the typical Zoom background on. We have a background that is representing one of the different community systems that we might need to help to protect from climate change. All right. So if you have any issues with anything technical, you might notice that in the chat function, you can actually chat directly to a person. And Caitlin Morris is our Zoom expert tonight. So if you're having any troubles, you can also chat directly with her. Okay, Cece, do you want to introduce which topics you're going to be covering?
Yes, hello, I'm Cece, and I will be covering facilitation of the energy supply and delivery and the public safety tonight.
And over to Megan. You're on mute.
Hello, good afternoon, evening. My name is Megan Tenhoff, and I'm excited tonight to talk to you all and facilitate the discussion about housing and transportation and food supply and agriculture.
And Denise.
Hi, I'm Denise Nelson, a civil environmental engineer, and I will be facilitating the breakouts on public health and well-being, and also on forestry and ecological function.
Thanks. So let's see if we can do something within Zoom for all the participants tonight. And we want to hear from you about your role in the city and how you might be able to express your thoughts about particular aspects of the community systems related to climate adaptation. And so we can see everyone's name on the screen. Is absolutely wonderful that you're labeled in that way. And what I'd like you to do, we'll go around and just tell us maybe a 60-second story for you. What is your story around climate resilience? Anything that you can think of you'd like to share, and just a brief session with us. So as you're listening to other stories, feel free again to enter ideas that you have in the chat function. And thanks to everyone who's already using it. In addition, if you'd like to, you can rename yourself. So everyone, if you mouse over your little square where you're showing for your video, you'll see 3 dots. And if you left click on those 3 dots, you'll see that there's a rename. It'll say rename there, and you can click on it. In your name, see if you can tell us maybe what you represent. You could be a wine enthusiast. You could be a cyclist. You could be an animal lover. Anything that you would want to put in there that might relate to how you want to show up tonight when we talk about climate adaptation. And of course, many of you might have 5 or 10 different things that you'd like to put in there and they won't all fit. That's fine. Just choose one that might be of importance to you. Great. And as we do that, who would like to go first, just to tell us maybe 60 seconds about how climate adaptation is important to you? Maybe something that you've experienced in the past, either here or someplace else. It's something that you think is very important about it. What's your story?
Hello, Linda. I'm Stacy Smalls. I'm the Public Works Director. This is our second meeting. Beforehand, you met with city employees, and I kind of just wanted to put out there to all the participants out there, thank you so very much for joining in to help us develop the climate action plan for the city. No response, comment, question is that old saying is a dumb question or comment. Please, please, please give us those concerns. And as I looked in the chat, you are doing that, so I appreciate that. The way that I look at climate is along the lines of how society took a step forward when it came to recycling or safety, doing seatbelts, and it became such a household thing. And I like it to be the same thing with climate. People can look at how climate affects their lives and their everyday lives, and how we can help facilitate that, how we can help. Because if some of you have seen the presentation that Susan has shown, that a bulk of this is going to come from our community. There's so much the city can do with our city facilities, with our city vehicles, and a lot more is going to come from our residents. So please, please, please help us with your different comments, and let's make climate an everyday thing, an ingrained thing into our society, like recycling and things of that nature that has come through our society over the years and decades. That's all I have.
Thanks, Stacy. Who would like to tell us their story?
Martha.
Martha. Well, I'm Martha, and I'm happy to be here. I mentioned concern about the tree cover, how developers seem to take as many trees as they think they might possibly ever need to take down, and they destroy them. And I walk a dog a lot now with COVID, and we see trees down all over my neighborhood, Rugby Hills. And I can't tell you how many in just the time of COVID, but probably 24 in the small area that we walk. And some of them, yes, they were damaged, but a lot of them were healthy looking trees. If you look at the cut at the bottom of the stump. So that's what I put in here. The other thing that gets me concerned is how people run their cars when they're not driving, they're not going anywhere. They're listening to the radio, keeping grandma cool, getting ready to go somewhere, looking at a map, doing their cell phone, etc. And I have made the mistake of speaking to some people, like policemen, in fact, about it, because they leave their cars running when they're stopped to talk about a dog bite. And they're there for 45 minutes with the car running. And it just seems to me that maybe we can't get people in parking lots to pay better attention, but we should be able to suggest to departments and to firms like Comcast, et cetera, to turn their motors off when they're doing a service call or, dealing with a public crisis of some sort. So anyway, that's my 2 cents and then some.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
Randy has his hand up. Go ahead, Randy.
So I also am interested in trees, but on a slightly different angle. I'd like to see more planted. When I'm driving or biking or hiking and I see some house that used to be a farm or used to be a pasture, and now it's just a gigantic lawn, I'm thinking, why don't you plant some trees here? Soak up some carbon. And if there's any way to encourage private owners like that to plant more trees in these big grassy spots, as opposed to spending all day cutting the grass, I'd appreciate that. The other thing I'd like to encourage is solar power, whether it's on houses or whether it's a large scale unit. My synagogue was able to do an investor-owned one where we did not own the array. They put it in, they serviced it, and we signed a contract for 20 years for power, whose costs would not go up. And I'd like to encourage that kind of deal too.
Thank you, Randy. Satano.
Hi, Caetano. Thanks for the opportunity. No worries. I just want to, among many different topics that I care, I will emphasize to try to complement what others mentioned. I agree with what have been said so far. Power supply, I think it's very important, especially as we are trying to move towards more renewable energy sources and away from natural gas, for example. We must have a grid that's reliable, that we can really count on. Yes, with storms and etc., there is an increased risk of having some outages. And then I'm very concerned as well, particularly related with heat. And since we're talking about personal story, I am from a tropical country, Brazilian, and we have lots of diseases related with insects or ticks that perhaps were not so common in colder countries. And as your warm season gets expanded, your tick season will also get expanded, your mosquito season will also get expanded, which increases the likelihood of getting cross-infection between infected folks, etc. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned about tick in particular is a result as well of wildlife in our city, which in my opinion is the result of sprawl. So how can we prevent that so we're not displacing wildlife as well?
Thank you so much. And if you would, anyone else would, as you'd like to speak, if you can see where to raise your hand on your profile, that's a great way to do it, but you can also call out. Go ahead, Peter. Oh, Peter, you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, I left something in the chat about, I'm echoing concerns that other people have expressed in the chat about the vulnerability of especially lower income housing developments to severe storms. I've got an aunt who lives in Gaylord, Michigan, and I saw footage of a trailer home that was basically, or trailer park that was 95% destroyed by unusually intense tornado in northern Michigan. And there is some evidence that more intense tornadoes are occurring farther and farther east in the country. So it's something we need to consider. But I would also like to emphasize the issue of food security. I took a look at the Albemarle County resilience document that just came out, and agricultural losses in a high emissions scenario are extremely high. And I think the city needs to both protect the regional agricultural system and ensure food security for local residents.
Thank you so much, Peter. Who else would like to tell us their story around climate resilience and adaptation? Anne. Oh, we'll have to unmute first.
Yeah, I'm particularly, I'm concerned about all of it. Tree cover, which I've seen really disappear radically in the last 30 years that I've lived here. But in addition to that, the vulnerability of our park system. A lot of our parks are built in lower floodplain areas. They're really vulnerable to, as we increase population density, as we endure these storms. I'm concerned about the integrity of our water systems, all of that, it all ties together. And something I'm really concerned about, as well as the secure food system for all residents. So
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. Travis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Travis Piedela from the Southern Environmental Law Center. And I work in our land and community program where climate and equity, I think someone alluded to earlier, have really become lenses to which we've come to view all of our work in recent years. And in the climate side, it's, we're certainly interested in the greenhouse gas reduction piece, but more specific to this conversation, we are really focused on natural resiliency. So protecting our stream buffers, our floodplains, our forests, and other tree canopy. That's incredibly important for protecting the community from flooding, from dissipating heat islands, all things that are going to be really important in the near future, and they also serve as carbon sinks, which help on the greenhouse gas reduction side too.
Thanks, Travis. Anyone else have a story to share? Your questions and ideas and thoughts around climate resilience. And this is just our intro, by the way. We're going to dive into many other things. So our tree and urban protector. You're on mute. You can unmute. Okay. So I'm not sure what your first name is, but tree and urban protector.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Okay, so my name is Ann Benham, and I'm also concerned about the loss of tree cover, especially in a neighborhood like I live, which is a JPA neighborhood, which is slated for a lot of development. Now, I know this is a student neighborhood, but building huge cement impervious surfaces and getting rid of a lot of tree cover is only going to, as far as I can see, increase the heat island effect, which is not a good thing. Not only does it make it uncomfortable for people if you're outside, but also if the temperature, the heat island effect is enhanced in a time of increasing, regular temperatures, then there's going to be a lot more pull on the energy grid. And that means more carbon emissions. It also means the possibility of rolling blackouts. So I think there needs to be a more careful look taken at the way to build higher density, which doesn't mean necessarily mowing down places where there are a lot of trees and putting up huge apartment buildings. Instead, I think it's a better idea to build smaller places and keep mature trees that are already growing whenever possible. Thank you.
Wonderful, Anne, thank you. Crystal.
Hi, my name's Crystal Rittervold. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Manager for for Charlottesville. And I wanted to just share an observation or a thought that we can keep in mind as we are going through this workshop. People don't like surprises, and climate change and the impacts of climate change are not just going to happen one day. And so part of what we're trying to do is be proactive as a community and think about all of the pieces that we don't maybe typically associate with climate change, and get ourselves prepared and make sure that we have systems in place, resources in place, an understanding of who's going to be hit and how are they going to be hit and what's going to be hit. So we don't like the big storm that knocks out our power for 5 days. And so this is really kind of a unique opportunity to get everybody's group think on this. And so I just wanted to thank folks for showing up.
Thank you. Brad, go ahead.
Hey, thank you. And apologies in advance if my connection gets lost. I'd really appreciate Crystal's comments there. I think something that we need to discuss a lot more in detail and possibly think at a higher level is the city and the regional response to extreme weather events. I'm not sure if UVA, as an example, if UVA has any plans for if climate refugees need to be bussed in from the coast and take up residence in the stadium, if there's an extreme hurricane in the coastal area or even in our area, that this area is not immune to the flooding events that can endanger a lot of folks. And I know it's been touched on, particularly lower income and historically marginalized communities can be particularly vulnerable to that. So I think there needs to be a bigger discussion of how the city and the wider area will handle events like that, the potential for wildfires, in the mountain areas that can affect air quality within the city. I think within the past decade or so, I remember has happened in the Shenandoah Valley. So thinking about what those responses to, especially sustained extreme weather events, they have a tendency to reinforce or affect each other. So we need to think at a higher level for disaster response, not just in the moment, but how to help folks bounce back from that sort of thing.
Thank you, Brad. And the 3 top climate hazards we'll be talking about even more today, I'll just mention them for the moment. They're extreme heat, they're flooding, and they're also changing seasonal conditions, which could include things even like drought. So I really appreciate hearing what you just added in, Brad. Thank you. Who else has a story about climate resilience and adaptation? Laurel.
Hi there. I'm an imposter from the county. I hope you guys don't mind, but from Albemarle County. Something that I've been thinking about is how, with extreme events that we've had, windstorms especially, there are a lot of skills we need in order to get what our basic services, and in the county often that requires chainsawing and setting up a generator and being able to use large vehicles and things like that. And I've been thinking about, as a parent, how so those manual skills are going to be needed more and more for our kids. And I've been thinking about how we can sort of get our kids and ourselves trained, really, to have the skills needed to deal with this new type of climate. And so workforce Workforce development is sort of at the higher level, but sort of an everyday person. If we had community trainings on chainsaw skills and that kind of thing, I think that would be a good public service.
Wonderful, Laurel. Thank you. Other thoughts and ideas and questions to introduce yourself around climate resilience and adaptation? We have just a few more minutes for this open discussion. Then we're going to move into some explanation about the climate vulnerability assessment. So if you have an idea, go ahead and speak up or raise your hand. Go ahead, Annette.
Hi there. I'm a county person also, but just want to say this is outside the three main things you all have, but just to talk about the electrification of the transportation system for a minute. But I know if you're living in an apartment, you can't, it's very hard to charge your car. So we have a home with electric, and we have an electric car, but we're in the country, so we just charge our own. But if you go to the city, again, if you're living in an apartment, you probably don't have that access. So that's a thing that in the broader, version of the world, we do want to push along electrification of the transportation system. So access to charging stations needs to happen, in the broader thinking of about things.
Thanks, Annette.
If I may just add a topic, I know that I already spoke, but we were talking so far about concerns, and I just want to talk about opportunities related to what Annette just said. I'm very interested in learning opportunities for resiliency related to power vehicle to grid supply from the electric buses. For example, if the city had 100 electric buses or 200 electric buses, including pupils, transportation plus public transit, what would that mean in terms of battery capacity for providing to a emergency hub during a catastrophe? I don't know. I'm very curious.
Okay, great question. And so we're going to capture everything from our meeting today. And as you'll see in just a moment, it'll come through in the climate vulnerability assessment and beyond. Okay, time for one more story. Go ahead, Sudie.
I'm wondering about the street lights. It seems like they're so inefficient, and we know many cities have lights that just shine down and they don't reflect up and keep you from seeing the stars. And I just think it's not healthy for the bushes and plants and other animals to have this light shining all night. And I have 3 on my street so close you can almost spit to reach them all. It seems like this would be a good way to go back and assess what's needed and put in better type of lighting for the environment.
Great. Well, thank you, Sudie. Okay. And we'll have more time to talk. If anything else that you think of comes up while we're doing the presentation for a few minutes, please do put it into chat. So we're going to set up the presentation slides to share, but right before we do that, we're going to ask you a poll. So what we do is we're going to post a poll in Zoom, and you should see it on your screen. And it's just one question in that poll. There was a climate vulnerability assessment survey that was done online in April, May. And we'd just like to know if you happen to have participated in that survey. So you can answer yes or no, or I can't recall. Great. And now we're going to hear from Susan Elliott to give us some background on the climate vulnerability assessment. And then after Susan, we'll be listening to the results of this survey that some of you had been participating in. And we'll hear from ICLEI, from Angelica, to describe the results of that information. Very good. So Susan, go ahead and do a slide share. These are the results of the poll we just took right now. So 13 of you out of 23 participated.
All right, are you guys able to see my slides okay?
We can see them.
Excellent, great, thank you. So thank you all for being here again for this evening and the great input and comments you've already put forward. This is the second of our 2 workshops right now. This is one of the last places for community engagement on our climate vulnerability assessment. Yesterday we had one with city and other government staff, and then tonight is with our community partners and community members. With our vulnerability assessment process here, that website at the very bottom, that is where you can find all of the materials about this planning process that has been happening so far. We have anything I mentioned coming up about past steps of the process, where there's a recording or a document or anything like that. You can find them all archived at charlottesville.gov/climate-plan. And when you get to the page, scroll down, there's a section that says climate vulnerability, click on that, and that's where everything is. So in terms of the climate protection program at the city, it was actually started back in 2006 with a commitment for the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement commitment. In 2017, City Council renewed the city's commitment to climate through the Global Covenant of Mayors commitment. Sorry, my throat's all itchy. Excuse me. With the Global Covenant of Mayors commitment, this introduced a second focus for our climate program. The U.S. Mayor's commitment was focused largely on greenhouse gas reductions, and then with the Covenant of Mayors commitment, it added on climate adaptation. So what this looks like is we are in the middle of 2 concurrent planning processes. One that is focused on greenhouse gas emission reductions. Another way to think of that is what are the things that we can do to make the future climate change less severe. The second track, which is the one on the right, climate adaptation, is a recognition that there's already been enough greenhouse gas emissions released globally that we are starting to see the effects of climate change, and we will continue to see those increase over time. And so referencing what Crystal said earlier, rather than just waiting and getting taken by surprise down the road, their climate adaptation planning is looking ahead at what can we expect to see from climate change in our area, and then how can we start preparing and adapting so that we're better positioned to handle those scenarios and those situations when they occur. What you can see in that right column is there's 3 different steps that lead to climate adaptation planning and developing a plan. Where we are right now is in the process of assessing our climate vulnerabilities. And so there's definitely some different data and things that we'll be sharing later of what we've gotten so far in this process. But this is really the part where hearing from you all tonight will then help inform and set that starting point of how we start doing our adaptation plan and where we focus on that going forward. In approaching this process, we began working with ICLEI. We have been members with them for a number of years at this point. They've worked with other communities to develop their vulnerability assessments. And what you're seeing on the screen is the timeline for what that process looked like that we had mapped out for developing both our identification of climate hazards for the area, plus then what our vulnerability assessment pieces are. And I'm going to walk through each step of this process so that if you haven't been part of it leading up to this point, you have a sense of what how we've gotten to where we are right now. So starting with the very beginning part of identifying the climate hazards, ICLEI looked at a tool that they have, which is called Temperate. It has over 20 different projection models for looking at what we can expect from climate change. In addition to looking at those different projection models, they also looked at some additional outside resources. And then within that, they packaged it all up together into a climate hazard memo, which is on our website. We also did a recording that then explained and talked through the data and what the findings were. That is also posted on our website. And out of that, what they identified is that the top 3 climate hazards for Charlottesville are going to be extreme heat, increased intensity of both precipitation, so the storm events, and also the flooding that comes after. And then our changing seasonal patterns is what we'll be expecting to see. And some of the comments that were shared earlier in terms of changing seasonal patterns It's that our winters are going to become less cold and our summers are going to become more hot. Spring will start earlier, fall will go later. Following from right around that same time in September, we also did a community open session to introduce this process and then get feedback from community members on that. We offered this mainly because we had gotten feedback from prior development efforts for different planning processes that community members or community organizations didn't feel they understood what was coming up or how the process was going to be shaped. And so they wanted to have a better sense of how it was going to look coming forward so that they could prepare themselves for it. They could research different pieces and they could be prepared to engage and contribute to the conversation. There were a couple of key points that we got out of that, some which I'll talk about in a little bit, that we then integrated into this process. In October and November, we had, similar to how we structured these workshops this time, we had the city staff forum and the community forum. We also then followed those two virtual live events with an online forum that we had open for about a month, so that if anybody in the community was not able to attend live, they would be able to listen to the recording from the event. So they would hear all the same information from the presentation, and then they could provide us information after the fact of what their input was so that we could take that into account. The purpose of these forums was to focus on those three main climate hazards, so the extreme heat, the increased precipitation and flooding, and the changing seasonal patterns, and then look at those across 12 different community systems. And what we are asking participants is that, given those three hazards, which community systems were they most concerned about? So which ones did they think were going to be most likely to be impacted? And then from the discussion, we noted also any key pieces people said of specific parts of those community systems. We then went ahead and ranked those, both by the ones that had received the top levels of concern by each individual community, or sorry, each individual climate hazard. We also looked at them and what their rankings were across all of the climate hazards combined. And then from that, we ended up identifying what you see on the screen in that table. Those were the community systems for each climate hazard that were ranked as the areas of most concern that we should be focusing on. And so if you look across that, you see some of them are present in all three. Some of the community systems were really only flagged for 2 of the 3 hazards, and there's a couple that were only flagged for a single hazard. Following from that, in January, we worked with the University of Virginia and Albemarle County to offer a Climate Action Together Resilience Roundtable discussion. This event was a direct result of that open session and comments we had gotten from the community about how we could improve this process overall and what they were looking for. What we had heard was that people understood that they could look at projection models, or they could read things in the New York Times, they could see what's happening in California or Colorado or any other place. But what they really wanted to understand better was not just from their own perspective, but from people who work in the field here in Charlottesville. When we have extreme weather events, things where we have streaks of extreme heat, when we have extreme storm events, when we are looking at our natural resources, what does that then look like in terms of how those bigger systems work? So they identified that they could bring their own perspective, but they wanted to also learn more about what happens in Charlottesville and how all that fits together. This roundtable discussion, it was structured around the 3 climate hazards, and we had professionals from 4 different community systems represented. So one was emergency response, one was social services, one is the health system, and the other was natural resources. It was a 2-hour event. It is recorded and posted online as well. You can find the link on our website. And we had about over 170 people signed in watching for the bulk of that 2 hours, which was quite impressive to see that show of interest from our community. But also there was a very good engaged discussion both amongst the panelists that we had, but also questions that we were getting from the audience. And I think in addition to just the folks that we have here tonight on this call, it shows that there is broader interest in our community and wanting to see these processes move forward and having that engagement and contribution opportunity. In April and to May, we had online a survey, which was based off of what we had gotten as input during that the forums in the fall. And it broke out within the different community systems, key assets of those that we had heard about, and asked people to rank them on how much they thought they could be impacted by these hazards, and then how adaptable they would be. And so Angelica from ICLEI is going to share more about the results and explain more in detail about the survey following my comments. So there will be more detail coming to you on that. In addition to the online survey, we also had an interactive online map that if anybody had a specific location in mind that they wanted to drop a point on that map and give us some information about why they were concerned about that exact place, we had that as an opportunity as well. And that then brings us to where we are today, which each of these steps, as you can probably hopefully have noticed, they're building on each other as we're moving forward in the process. And so today is building on all of the past efforts that have been happening. And this is where we're really looking to dig in on the community systems, the hazards, and hear what really where we need to be focusing moving forward as we start looking at our climate adaptation process. So what was coming up next is after tonight, all of your comments will get compiled together. There will then be a memo that will speak to the results of our vulnerability assessment. This will be put out for community comment, so there will be more time or another opportunity for you all to review the sum total of this process and provide your input on it. We will then incorporate those comments and finalize it and then publish our final vulnerability assessment report. And then we will use that as the basis for moving on to adaptation planning. With that, I will go ahead and hand the microphone back over.
Thanks, Susan. So the climate vulnerability assessment is the time to recognize those hazards and the different, we call them assets, but the different things that need protection when it comes to climate changes. And then the climate adaptation plan will be the time that we can focus further what it is that we can do to help protect and to help make it a better situation. But today, even as we're speaking, we'll be talking about some of those things because you'll have ideas about what to protect, as well as maybe how to protect it. So now we're going to hear from Angelica Greco, and she's from ICLEI, the organization that was able to do the climate vulnerability assessment process. And she's going to talk about the results of that survey. Go ahead and screen share, Angelica.
Thank you so much, Linda. Is everyone able to see my screen? Awesome, thanks so much. So hi, everyone. I'm Angelica, and I do work for ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability. We're a network of local governments working on climate and sustainability issues. And I am helping out with the data analysis and report write-up pieces for Charlottesville's vulnerability assessment. Today, I will be presenting an overview of the city's climate vulnerability assessment survey, and it's really great to see that some of you filled it out. Okay, so the survey was on the city's website between April 20th and May 20th, and in that time, 41 people responded, 95% of whom lived in Charlottesville. So I know that 41 people is a very small percentage of populations. That's why we're really using these survey results more to open our conversation today, not necessarily saying that they represent the entire city's views. So as Susan already mentioned, we conducted this survey to really engage the community about what vulnerability to climate change looks like in Charlottesville. And so more about what I mean by that is if something, this could be, for example, infrastructure, like maybe a road, a government service, trash collection, tree maintenance, something like that, or even a group of people. So for example, low-income residents. If these services or groups could be harmed, disrupted, or damaged by climate change, we would then consider them to be vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So the matter of what exactly in Charlottesville is vulnerable to climate change is a huge question. I know we already heard a lot of different opinions on that. And so we decided to focus people's responses by asking about vulnerability through the lens of the community systems that Susan also mentioned. And so when I'm talking about community systems, I kind of describe them to people as being a community's fabric. They keep things running smoothly, and they make Charlottesville a place that you love to live in and to work in. And so the 7 hexagons here are examples of community systems. At the top, maybe we see this red hexagon. This could be agriculture systems. The green leaf, maybe that's local ecosystems. Purple building right below that, maybe that's the education system, and so on. And so every community, Charlottesville included, has many different community systems like these ones. And so on the survey, we asked people to characterize how the 3 climate hazards that Susan mentioned, so extreme heat, precipitation, flooding, and changing seasonal conditions, affect various community systems and therefore our lives, people's lives in Charlottesville. And so this example sort of shows how we asked people about this on the survey. So here we have the climate hazard extreme heat that we paired with the public health community system. And so the survey broke that system down into several more specific categories. And so they include households that don't have access to AC and insulation, people without access to shelter, or maybe that live in areas without tree canopy shade, people who are susceptible to heat-related illnesses or to poor air quality, outdoor work and workers, tourism and outdoor activities, the ability to commute or travel by foot, bike, or bus, and just in general, the public health and wellness in the city of Charlottesville. And so for every category, we were asking people to rank 2 different things: the impact of the climate hazard and the ability of whatever particular category it was to respond or adapt to the climate hazard, both on a scale of 1 to 5. And so kind of let's see how this works together for this first one, for households without access to AC. Maybe I think extreme heat will have a high impact, so I would put 4. And then I think that these households' ability to respond or adapt is low, so I would put 2, and so on. And so respondents would go through this exact same thing for every hazard system pairing. And so the reason that we asked respondents about both impacts and the ability to respond or adapt was because we wanted to look at something called adaptive need. So adaptive need is a way of measuring the need for adaptation. So in other words, it helps us identify areas or things in Charlottesville where there's the greatest need to adapt to climate change. We calculated adaptive need by taking the average of everyone's answers, so everyone who filled out the survey, and plotting them on a graph. So if we look at the top right, we have red boxes. That's where we have the highest adaptive need. And if something's going to land in that red area, that category would need to have both high potential impacts from climate change and a low ability to adapt or respond. And in the lower left corner, it's the opposite. So lower impacts of climate change and a higher ability to adapt. And so the need to target something like that for adaptation is going to be lower. And I can show some example data. So this is for the combination of extreme heat and outdoor work and workers. You can see this point is in the red zone, or the area with the highest adaptive need, because respondents said that the impact of extreme heat on this group is high and its ability to adapt is low. In comparison, if we look at extreme heat and grocery stores, they appear in this lighter orange-yellow area. And that's because respondents thought that there were relatively low impacts and a higher ability to adapt. And so based on this chart, I would say that the need for adaptation efforts that target outdoor work and workers is higher than the need to target grocery stores. So I'm going to go over some highlights from the results. If you'd like to see the full report on the survey, it's already posted on the link Susan shared on the website. So these are the results we have for extreme heat. We asked respondents about extreme heat in 4 community systems: agriculture and food supply, energy supply, access and delivery, forestry and ecological function, and public health and wellness. So the color of each category box shows how high the adaptive need is. So the red boxes have the highest adaptive need, followed by the dark orange and then the light orange boxes. I'm actually going to just focus our attention on a few key results here. So the first is for public health and wellness. So compared to the other systems, 5 categories for public health have high levels of adaptive need. So these include categories related to lack of access to AC and shade, people with heat-related illnesses, sensitive to poor air quality, outdoor work and workers, and the general public health and wellness in the city. And so these findings generally mean that people who filled out the survey are going to be especially worried about how some people and activities are going to fare in extremely high heat conditions. So for example, if someone works outside, if they're unhoused or homeless or don't have AC, they can face dangerous levels of heat stress. I also see concern for households with high energy bills, and maybe that's because people are thinking that the bills are only going to get higher in extreme heat conditions. So another result we have is concern for natural and semi-natural parts of our community systems. So that's livestock, crops and ecosystems, our streams and rivers and pollinators. And we actually saw this result under 2 different community systems, agriculture and food supply, and forestry and ecological function. And this is also something I noticed that you echoed in the chat box and in your comments today. In general, I would say that these results are a sign that people are worried about heat is going to affect these natural elements in Charlottesville. Maybe they're wondering things like what's going to happen to crops or animals when it gets really hot, or how will our ecosystems, our trees change and adjust, or maybe not in the face of heat stress. So these aren't the only important results. You could kind of skim over the other columns. If you did that, you'll also see some concerns about local agricultural businesses like CSAs and farmers markets, food banks and grocery stores. And then for energy supply, people are also grid reliability, also something I heard echoed by our commenters here, and how, for example, maybe there are people who need electricity to power medical supplies, how they'll deal with power outages related to heat and other things like that. So for precipitation and flooding, the workshops flagged 6 different community systems as being of concern. So once again, agriculture and food, energy supply, access and delivery, and public health. But then we additionally have housing, public safety, and transportation. And so if you look at this table as a whole, you'll see it is very large and larger than the one we had for extreme heat. And this points to the fact that people are really concerned about how flooding is going to affect lots of different aspects of life in Charlottesville. And so you can see in the dark red boxes, these are categories with a high need for targeted adaptation measures, and they go across all of the community systems. So we see a diverse range of concerns. So once again, people are worried about agricultural systems and how local food operations, something I also heard someone mention, how local food will cope with flooding. They're also worried about energy systems and whether those who really need power, like people with medical devices, the food suppliers that have to keep food cold, and maybe people who have no generators or backup power options, how these people and groups will suffer or face financial loss if there are flood-related outages. There's also some concern about housing, especially housing in floodplains that has infiltration issues, and low-income affordable housing, as well as public housing. We also are seeing some high adaptive need around public health again. So this is people without access to shelter who may be living or working in floodplains, or maybe have water infiltration issues in their homes. There are also some additional concerns around water quality and the connection between flooding, having standing water, and the spread of mosquitoes and other pests. So public safety and transportation both are new here. People are worried about access to low-lying homes and businesses, evacuation routes. People are worried about road safety, what would happen if cell service was lost, and kind of people's ability to commute to make it to work or school in flood-related events. So lastly, we have changing seasonal conditions. So the survey only asked about 3 systems: agriculture and food supply, forestry and ecological function, and public health and wellness. So people are very concerned about local agricultural businesses again, as well as farms, orchards, vineyards, livestock, and that's why we see these categories showing up as having higher adaptive need. However, the system with the most categories with high adaptive need is the forestry and ecological function system. So we see 5 out of 6 categories in red. This could be pointing to the fact that people are concerned about how changing seasons, so like Susan mentioned, winters are getting warmer, springs are coming earlier, how those things will affect Charlottesville's environment and ecology. And so for public health, people are worried again about outdoor work and workers, maybe in heat conditions, people who don't have shelter, and how changing seasonal conditions might make people more exposed to pests like mosquitoes, ticks, etc., since warmer temperatures in winter and longer summers mean more time for pests to spread and thrive. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm going to hand it back over to Linda now.
Thank you so much, Angelica. And thanks for the comments also again in the chat. What we'd like to do now is talk about one very important piece, and that is our collective voice and who should be part of that. So it's wonderful that all of you are here. And what we'd like you to do, you can put it in chat or say it out loud. Just tell us who else do you think should be part of this conversation as we move further into the climate adaptation process. So who could be helpful? Who do we need to hear from? And when we hear that from you, it will make it easier for the city to also put those different stakeholders whom you identify into the list of invitees for next time. So who else should be part of this conversation? You can name a particular name if you know someone who's very involved in a portion about this, or you could name an organization, whatever you're thinking. So low wealth neighborhoods. Anyone else you can think of also to be part of this conversation? BIPOC community. SCLC. Riders, so transit riders, is that what you're meaning there? Those who are taking public transit? Okay. So we're getting lots into the chat, and you also, if for anyone who isn't able to use the chat, just say them out loud. Who else could be part here? So landscapers and contractors and commuters and construction workers, all those folks who will be working outside. Rivanna Conservation Alliance, Rivanna Master Naturalists, wonderful. Environment Virginia, Environment America, Tree Stewards. HHS, living in energy inefficient with lots of leaks housing units. Okay, so those who are living in the energy inefficient housing units. Thank you. Households. Good. Incarcerated people. Our youth. Lots of good input. Okay, so keep it coming as you think of new groups or others that you think should be part of the conversation. Feel free to add that into the chat at any point in time you'd like to. You could name 10, you could name 20, you can name 1. It's all good. So what we're going to do now, as everyone's still adding, it's great. We're going to start our breakout sessions, our breakout rooms. And the way the breakout rooms work, we're going to turn on the breakout rooms. Caitlin will do that for us in just a minute. And when she does, it will pop up something on your screen. You just have to click it to accept to go into that breakout room. And it's like going into hyperspace, and all of a sudden you'll end up in another Zoom room. So it might take like a few seconds till you land there, but you're going to land. And when you do, there'll be a certain topic that your room will cover. Now we're setting it up right now in a random sense, so anyone can end up in any particular room. But as you heard from the 3 facilitators earlier today, we're going to start with 3 topics in this round of breakouts. We'll spend about 15 minutes in the room, and then the room will close automatically. You don't have to press any button. You don't have to do anything. You'll be pulled back into this main session. We'll get back together for a minute, and then we're going to go back into the breakout rooms, and we're going to do a second topic. So for the first round of breakouts, the 3 topics are going to be food supply and agriculture, public health and well-being, and energy supply and delivery. So those are the different system topics we'll be covering in the first round. and then I'll tell you the topics for the next round when we come back. When you get into the breakout room, what we're going to ask you to discuss will be to dive deeper into this community system. So dive deeper, for instance, into food supply and agriculture around the effect of extreme heat on it, of flooding on it, or of the changing seasonal conditions on it. So maybe winter becomes longer, let's say, or shorter. And what in particular would be affected. So if everyone right now can just think, this is like practice for the breakout rooms, see if you can name something in Charlottesville that could be affected by those different hazards. It could be, for instance, the downtown mall. It could be people who are riding on the bus in extreme heat. So think about how you or anyone else might be affected by these things and get specific. So that's what we're going to ask you for. We have the categories and you've seen the discussion around that. Angelica talked about it. Let's dive into those categories and identify what needs help. And when we do that, that tells us where we need to focus our efforts when we're talking about what to do to provide help. But we need those specific locations, specific organizations, people, anything that needs to have that assistance. Does anyone have questions before we go into the breakout room? Okay. And the survey results are also going to be in the report for the climate vulnerability assessment. So you'll be able to see that as well. Thanks for asking that question. All right, if anyone has any concerns or anything about moving around in Zoom, you can hang out in this room for a moment where we are, and we'll help you to get into your breakout room, your breakout session. We're going to have what we call whiteboards in those breakout rooms. So you'll see on the screen something that's written, and you are actually able to click on that and type in it. So you can try your hand at doing that. And if that is not an easy thing, just speak it out loud and your facilitator is going to type in there for you. So we want to make it easy for everyone. If you are in a specific topic room and you'd rather be in a different one, then just let us know. You can stick around here because when your breakout room pops up on the screen, you'll know which one you're going to. And you just say, Linda, Caitlin, I don't want to be in food supply and agriculture. I want to be in energy supply and delivery, and we'll switch you. Okay, we're going to open the breakout rooms.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion today about food supply and agriculture, specifically within Charlottesville. So to start this conversation, I think I'm going to pose the question of where, how about this? Where or how might intense, I don't know if I can type and talk at the same time, rainstorms affect food supply and or ag. I'm going to just abbreviate for sake here in Charlottesville. I'm also going to abbreviate Charlottesville. When I worked on a farm, it was a small local farm in Washington State before I moved over here. One of the things that we were concerned about was seasonal drought and the ability to when to put the most valuable crop in, which for our farm was tomatoes, the crown jewel of seasonal eating. So I can just put that here as an example as we get started here. And like I said, everyone can type in, anyone can type in here. So I'm going to put that over here. Okay. And what type of crops do you think? Like what type in Charlottesville? Specific, is it a food crop?
Sorry, could you share the link again to the whiteboard?
Oh, can you not see the whiteboard that I'm sharing right now?
I can see it. Was there a link that where we're supposed to be able to type, or did I
Nope, you can
misunderstand?
type right in here. You can type right in this.
Cool. Just put the cursor on the screen.
Yep. There's, yeah, we've got draw, shapes, lines. Yeah. It's a newer feature within Zoom. So you don't have to go over to like Google Docs. You know, I think we've all done that where you go over to Google Docs and you do a type together.
I haven't lived here very long. Is there always the amount of wind that we get? This past year, it seems like it's been terribly windy.
I'm going to let someone else answer that. Hopefully there's longtime resident in here. And
I think it's getting windier.
Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it made the cut for the like top 3 conditions here, but I know that high wind events are a known regular, I don't know what the right term is, but extreme weather event or something like that. So it is, I know, along with flash flooding, at least I think one of the more lethal weather events in the area, high wind events, but you know, maybe doesn't always qualify if it's just a windy day. But I think that is a regional concern.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can just ask, is there a specific setting you need to enable to start typing or drawing on the?
It is a relatively newer feature in Zoom. So if you haven't done an update in a bit, then it might not be there, but you should be able to just click right on this side over here. I don't know if you can see a cursor moving at all, but there on the left, there's like an arrow and a pencil and square, and you can just be able to click on that and will create, like for instance, text. It creates a text box that only I can see, but I can start to see text come in as others are writing on it. But would you like me to add something for you, Brad?
Yeah, I guess I'm in the updates needed group. I think under increased precipitation and flooding, I think food access or supply chain access could be in there if there's extreme weather events that prevent food from being delivered to the city or to the area from other areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is the main agriculture crop here? I'm not even aware of what's grown here.
Mostly beef cattle in the county anyways. And then within the city, it's gardens, I think, vegetable gardens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate this comment about availability of crop species. I do know that in Alaska, they are testing corn varieties to be able to grow in Alaska with a short daylight time. This may not be able to grow corn in the Corn Belt anymore.
It takes so much out of the earth, I would think corn would be frowned upon to be grown in large quantities. It's really hard on the, from what I've studied, hard on the environment, not an environment friendly crop. And are they going to use it for running cars or for people eating?
Well, I think it was out of a land grant university, so I can't fully say, but they're oftentimes really working on the large crops, you know, commodity crops.
Tasteless food.
So let me pose this maybe that may help. Where and how in Charlottesville might people or places be vulnerable to extreme food specifically to extreme heat? So we have this, yeah.
I'll say something for that one because I can't seem to use the whiteboard either. So just this past week, my neighbors both work in Charlottesville. One is a florist and one is a butcher, and both stores were having freezer problems and having to get rid of a lot of stuff. And part of it was that like at the butcher shop, that they had such a high electricity load because it was so hot outside. The AC was going hard, and then probably old freezers as well, and not it wasn't all keeping up. And then there was a big storm and the electricity went out, and so they all kind of had to go home at that point because they couldn't work. So there's sort of this cascading effect that can affect them as people who work in that industry, and potentially, harsh conditions and lost wages. But also, if that happens, if electricity goes out for a long time, then food spoils very quickly in our grocery stores, and that can be a real problem for all of us.
So it seems like solar panels are good, but it seems like windmills might be a good thing here too.
If I can jump in, kind of piggybacking off that last point, I think this probably could go under maybe all three categories, or maybe extreme heat or changing seasons, is nutritional content. That if food supply crops are more highly stressed, I think they have been documented to have issues with yields as well as actual nutritional content, by whatever volume it is, bushel of corn or whatnot.
Nutritional content and yield.
Well, it's hard on the soil. Some of these crops take so much out, and then you have all these terrible commercial fertilizers instead of being environmental friendly and thinking of how to put back into the earth to make it healthy. Cattle are really hard on the earth when you think about it. I'm just surprised there aren't other big crops of food being grown here. Apparently it's just homegrown gardens. We don't have
a lot of apples. Apples and vineyards in the county.
Vineyards aren't going to feed people much.
I'm not sure if this is another one for multiple buckets, but the potential impact of wildfires, either extreme heat or drought on arable land, if a significant wildfire event could reduce the capacity in the area.
Fire and drought. Mm-hmm. I agree that separating some of these out, like saying specifically extreme heat, increased precipitation, and seasonal conditions all sort of have this, impact on things, right? And they're, what do we say here? Cascading effects, right? So we have a really hot, okay, so say it's a dry spring, okay, and then we have really hot, and then a few really hot days, and then a huge rainstorm. A lot of the like new baby plants that are fresh out, new sprouts might just completely wash away, right? They already were under a lot of stress, so they could wash away. So there's multiple cascading effects that I can think of here.
We've seen quite a bit of damage to crops and trees from hail, from large hail.
Okay.
And that's more common in the spring and summer now.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Can you think of a specific tree or place that you saw this damage? Like, was it in your own yard or like a
Yeah,
favorite tree?
I live in the county, but yeah, it was in our area, and I talked to one of the there's a farm market on Barracks Road that's not far from the city. And one of the people that works there, all their tomato plants had been destroyed by the hail. So that was a whole crop that was gone for that year.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have, okay. More.
It seems like there are new insects moving into the area because of the climate change too, that we don't have any way to deal with.
And we'll make sure we have a transcript of your thoughts, and you're also welcome to use the chat function, and that will be recorded. Should we start with extreme heat? How will that impact forestry and ecological function?
I guess one side is that retaining, significant amount of forest and green spaces will help to reduce extreme heat.
Ah, good. That's right. I immediately went to how the heat might damage the trees or the species, but I'm so happy that you brought up the other side of that coin.
Well, and that is part of the problem, is that a number of the trees that we have in the area that would be considered native will no longer be native. So we'll end up with trees from farther south. Now, what that will do with the insect population, for example, other species, it's going to be a problem both for the agricultural side and the forestry side.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
All right. It looks like Linda might be here to save us and set up our whiteboard. Thank you, Linda. We were just talking about how the trees, the forestry can help cool areas by providing shade, but then also extreme heat might provide some growth challenges for our native species. And plants and then also insects from further south will become native in our region.
Okay.
And snakes.
Snakes. Is that good or bad?
In my book, it's not good. There's some poisonous characters down there we don't need up here.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to have too much worry about some of the venomous snakes that are around. We have counterparts here anyway, except the ones like the cottonmouth, which won't get past the rapids, fall line. And the other ones, we have coral snakes nearby, we have rattlesnakes, we have copperheads. Those are the three main ones.
Right.
And besides, they're good to have because they take care of things like rats and mice and other pests.
All right. Do you have any thoughts about the impacts of increased precipitation and flooding?
Well, I think some of the plants and trees that grow around here would be exposed to overwater and, would die from being flooded. We'd lose some.
I would add to that the impact on our existing community gardens. I think even just a couple of years ago, the IRC's community garden flooded and they had to move it, but I imagine that'll just continue to be the case.
Thank you. By any chance, was that a flower garden or was it a food garden?
It was a food producing garden.
Oh, that'll be a big impact.
So yeah, I'm talking specifically about like Urban Agriculture Collective and the groups doing food community gardens.
Okay.
I'm gonna kind of echo the point I made for the extreme heat, where our existing forests and green space also play a key role in absorbing and storing floodwaters, so reducing the impacts that come from that.
Right. It sounds like we'll just be expecting the existing trees to do more.
But yeah, and I mean, certainly planting more trees will help improve that further.
That's wonderful.
And also just being careful when we are doing things like new developments and new infrastructure projects to make sure we're keeping that those functions, those green spaces play today and forests play today, that those are taken into account when we consider any loss of those and avoiding them to the maximum extent we can.
So you see that is happening.
Well, certainly when we build, new roads and other, it certainly happens that some trees and other green space are removed for new development, and certainly, not saying that growth shouldn't occur, but it should be an important consideration as when those projects are designed and located.
It sounds like our last breakout group was talking about communicating with zoning and the planning department and coordinating priorities. Same thing here.
Well, we're having that discussion in our neighborhood, JPA neighborhood association, because there's a move to put a 7-story building on JPA, removing some large trees, increasing the impervious surfaces, which will increase the water runoff into the local storm drains.
Right.
And we've been trying to persuade the planning board and the city council to listen to us as we talk about that. So we're not sure we have much success.
You do have some allies in other neighborhoods. Take heart.
Could you name your neighborhood?
I'm in Rugby Hills, and I have friends in North Downtown that are very much concerned about that project, and also folks in Belmont. So it's widely understood, maybe not very deeply, but a lot of different places.
Rugby Hills, Belmont, and North Downtown.
Yeah.
Great. Concerned about increased impervious areas.
Well, and that particular project that Peyton mentioned.
Okay. So the concerned about the JPA.
The JPA monster building, yeah.
Okay.
And I'll
I live
just
in
add-
I was just going to say, I live in the Kellytown neighborhood. We're slated to have 13 townhomes built on an empty lot that's up the road from me. I have an open creek in my backyard. I've lived here since 1989. The last big storm we had, the very first time this has ever happened, water was pouring over my bridge and washed it away. I'm the second person that's happened to. Our property crosses the creek. It is within the 100-year floodplain, but I think all of those floodplain designations nationwide are being changed because they have to be, because the floodplains are changing. And so when you look at 13 townhomes, sure, they're going to put new trees there, but these are mature trees that are being torn down. And a big tree will absorb 300 gallons of water. A little bitty tree can't do that. And so we all live downstream. And I think that it's good for everybody to understand that and realize that I think it's really important that we have more housing in this community, but it shouldn't come at the expense of the existing housing. If you're a person with a creek in your backyard that's suddenly flooding, it's real.
This is really good information. And how many years did you say it has never been like that? In how many years?
30,
okay.
Since 1989.
Great. Very good. So,
another action on this subject would be managing and strengthening the riparian buffers along waterways, whether they're creeks or rivers, because some places it's just rocks and they don't do anything to slow it or to absorb, manage the water.
Well, the city came to my neighborhood a few years ago. Somebody came, I don't know who it was, and asked every neighbor to maintain a vegetated buffer strip. Now, we do that, but it's not enough. And we have lost a lot of trees, and people have also planted bamboo, so I'm concerned about invasive species. But beyond that, I think it can be a really destructive force. Water can be, as much as it is an absolute pleasure. And I would like it to maintain its pleasurable aspect.
Great point.
Are there any special concerns about the potential shifting of the seasons or the seasonal patterns?
Yeah, I think it's getting harder and harder for trees and other plants to reproduce fully and create fruit when we get these late frosts, these warm winters, and then a sudden frost which zaps the flowers and they can't produce the fruit after that.
This last winter was a perfect example of that.
Yes. And I think that just underscores the action item you had there. Plant more trees for all the reasons that we're talking about.
Well, also our ecosystem is complicated. Insects arrive here expecting plants to be blooming, and either they've already bloomed or they're have yet to bloom. Birds come here and nest at a certain time. We can't, humans may be able to adapt, but our ecosystem cannot adapt that way. So slowing that process down as much as possible, I think, is a really important aspect of this.
There's a great whole issue in the National Geographic, I believe from May, on forests around the world, and with some emphasis here as well. And it's really worth a read if you can get a hold of it, because it goes into a lot of the things we're talking about.
Great. And our team has done research on these topics. Susan's here with us now. So what we're looking for is, your specific stories, specific hazards or suggestions that you have for your neighborhood or your street or some part of the city or some community group.
Well, back to the business of flooding and drivers, I think that might have been in the last discussion, signage where these floods are apt to occur.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to the mapping and the other things that were talked about. That was the last group though, I think. Sorry.
No, yes, thank you. That's good. That's fine.
I'd like to put in a last plug for the city renewing its emphasis on protecting critical slopes, which when they're disturbed can have big impacts on water quality and also leading to excessive stormwater runoff.
And in that, we need to enlist the university as well. I had to get after him for slopes on Brandon at the new dorms there. They didn't realize initially that I actually had read the regulations on how long you could let a slope stay open.
Ah, yes. You'll be happy to know that we did include UVA in the staff discussions yesterday. So it wasn't just staff, it was also the Regional Planning District Commission and other partners.
Well, I'm sorry yesterday that Susan didn't, or I didn't mention either one at the Senior Statesman of Virginia, because we had the University of Virginia represented. Susan was there, and so was
Steve from Albemarle County.
Yeah, Albemarle County and all. So it was a good group. And C3, the other Susan.
The other Susan.
I think
yes, and I had it opposite ends of the table for panelists, so it was clear if someone was speaking to Susan, which Susan were they looking towards?
Oh, my.
And the nice thing was I got to give Susan a plug on requiring city vehicles to turn off their ignition if they were sitting and idling, except for police and ambulance, which is a different story.
Why?
Not always a different story. Sometimes, but not always. I just feel like the city could make a better use of the expertise and the knowledge at UVA in a range of topics. And it's come up many times before.
If I may, for transportation, I was thinking, I mentioned bus stops before in a different moment, but I wanted to add, now that I'm thinking a little bit with extra time, I think that it's also about reducing waiting times. Like I think that between having a bus stop and waiting half an hour or having no one waiting 3 minutes, like I would take having no one waiting 3 minutes. And then also perhaps having on-demand mobility more widely spread, because if public transit is picking me up in front of my door and I have an app that says, hey, driver will be like, the public transit is going to be outside in 3 minutes, I can be in the comfort of my home until the last minute before I go inside, right? So I'm just kind of thinking a little bit beyond, outside of the box of just simply bus stops.
I think it'd be nice if all the buses, maybe they are free. I was in a city where they had green buses and it was free to cut down on people driving their cars, and they ran regularly and it was great.
I do a lot of walking as my transportation. I live downtown, which is really nice, and I can get where I need to go. But in extreme heat, it's really difficult to do a lot of walking. And I've found that the places that have no trees are the biggest problems for getting around. So I would like to see more trees for people who walk to well, I live right downtown, and wherever there are big buildings, there aren't many trees, and it's so that's a problem. In the neighborhoods, it's not so bad because people have planted trees, but in any of the areas where there are businesses, it seems like it's a problem.
In sidewalks, there should be sidewalks.
Oh, yes.
A lot of places don't have them, and it's dangerous.
It's
for
very
children.
dangerous.
And I've read that cities that have sidewalks, people walk and they know their neighbors, and that makes safety better and less crime. All connects.
The sidewalks need to be in good repair too, which a lot of them aren't.
Talked about zoning, but what about people that are renting and assistance in improving the energy efficiency of their rental units?
Where I was living, they urged little houses, and they were making whole communities as small, and urging people not to keep adding on and think about the environment and be more efficient in the appliances you get. And I think it makes a big impact if you can talk about small and not having to have these mansions that are everywhere in the city.
Another thought that I had about extreme heat and getting around is that a lot of people live in places where they can't walk to a grocery store or someplace, or a doctor or whatever. There aren't neighborhoods, I guess is what I'm thinking, where I live, that I can get to a grocery store in 5 minutes, but with extreme heat, for some people, that would be quite a slog to get to a grocery store that's farther away than 5 minutes.
I have a comment. I have a question that, depending on the answer, there I will have a comment. Is right now the moment to talk about resiliency hubs for the case of, let's say that temperature is projected to achieve a very, very high level, like once in 100 years, it's going to be like super hot. And then is right now the moment to talk about not housing per se, but perhaps public spaces like schools or libraries that can, or even like a fully dedicated space that can be places where people go and they're going to be, how can I say, there's going to be guarantee that it's going to be powered and it's going to be like cool and comfortable for these extreme heat events. Or I don't know if that's, what do you think? Okay, okay. I'll help you write that then, but I'll just like to say that something that I've been thinking during the high temperature that we had 3 years ago. I was thinking, hey, we talk so much about carpooling. Wouldn't it be so awesome if we talked a little bit more about AC pooling or something like that? Because from a resilience perspective, if during very warm days, we had public spaces that we could go instead of having everybody's home running full power, or if we just kind of were more aware of, I would just contact my friends and try to spend the day together. So we're not like overly using the grid. I think that something like that would be smart.
I think related to that, we need to pay attention to the homeless population in the city and how they're going to cope with extreme weather events, particularly heat. I've seen some of the facilities they're at now, and they seem pretty substandard.
We had community centers all through the city that would offer recreation as well as places to go to be cool. And I'm just astonished that there's not, that you've got one, the center, which is for older people, but there's nothing that I know of throughout the city. Like in all the parks, there could be buildings that would be recreational and community, and people can gather to do all kinds of activities after school for the children and for the seniors and for the neighborhoods. It's odd that the city, which is a tourist city, doesn't do more for the people. Well, you said you were up in Washington, you know, how they had that huge area in the summer that's a park, but it's water. People can go to the fountain and play in the water, and they take their dogs, and it's a real community gathering. Why don't we have something like that? But I mean, you know about that place. And we should have something here. We've got tourists. Let's do something to bring people in. We've got a lot of empty shopping centers that could be turned into huge areas for the people. All kinds of possibilities with these empty buildings that are just standing there with lots of parking possible.
Some people have touched on it before, but I was at a Piedmont Environmental Council event where they talked, one of the presenters informed me about a green corridor that is under planning, connecting Preston Avenue with areas near West Haven. That was sort of my general impression of the project. Is that being supported by the city? I mean, other people on this in this breakout room have talked about the need for spaces like that, for corridors like that. So I would, you know.
So I just joined the Piedmont Environmental Council as the local field rep, and Peter Krebs in our office handles that. You may be talking about the Norfolk Southern corridor, the unused rail corridor that goes from Preston.
Yeah.
That's what you're probably thinking about, yes.
Record button here. Okay, so for the whiteboard, you may have already gotten all the lessons learned you needed there on using that, but please feel free to go ahead and hit that T on the left and click the screen for a text box for anything you'd like to go ahead and post. Otherwise, we'll capture everything that's discussed verbally, and anyone is welcome to get started on any thoughts. What could public safety planning include to decrease negative impact to vulnerable people and infrastructure? What exactly needs protection as far as public safety? Extreme heat cooling centers for vulnerable residents. Thank you. How about for increased flooding events, public safety and flooding, extreme heat, maintaining and upgrading grid infrastructure? Thank you.
I would say for like public awareness raising, what to do for in case of precipitation, just so that vulnerable populations know how to respond.
Thank you. Okay. Accessible, safe transit routes, including public transit. Yes, thank you.
Building on the cooling centers for vulnerable residents, I would say, as those are being, if those are being planned or looked at, it really ties into the precipitation and flooding, because you don't want to put them in places that flood. So you really have to, again, look at how all this interacts with each other. And again, can people get to these centers, you know, is the other part, whether it's transit or walking or whatever. So one would have to kind of look at numbers of different factors together to say where would be a safe, you know, and accessible place that people could go, whether they're dealing with storms, heat, or whatever.
Right. Thank you. And Brad's got a lot of great ideas coming through the chat. The Zoom unfortunately doesn't allow copying and pasting, so I'll let the chat capture some of it, but he's got for changing seasons, outdoor, seasonal worker safety, heat exposure, extreme heat, violent crime, and public protests documented to increase in higher heat conditions. That is true. Certainly an issue. Civil unrest.
I think along those lines, we should probably consider, as someone mentioned earlier, the climate refugees.
Yes.
Plan for those.
Thank you. Okay. Other specifics for Charlottesville in particular, if you think about around the areas where you live and work, folks in your lives, that might help put a little perspective on some particular specifics.
Well, Brad is putting something about communication to people, and I think that's really something that, you know, whether it's the local weatherman or some kind of alerts that would go on through the city system, perhaps. But if you're going to have extreme weather or particularly numbers of high heat days, that there be some way to communicate that to alert people, so they would have some ability to respond.
Yes, thank you. First generation low income UVA students, yes. Thank you. If I missed any of Brad's comments here, violent crime. Okay.
I would also throw in here, just in general, talking about communication, the need to have communication in multiple languages. And not only are you having, you know, you have some significant immigrant population groups coming in, and also students that are from various places. So
yes, very good. Nice to everything. Okay. Other negative impacts. Infrastructure in particular, any thoughts on infrastructure related?
I don't know how, you know, the infrastructure in Charlottesville is regarding roads and bridges, but I know, for example, Richmond has had a history of massive flooding coming into the downtown area through the river, and it, you know, takes out.
Oh, Annette, I apologize. It looks like you froze up on us a little bit again there. We can't quite hear you. There you are. You're back.
My connection is unstable. That's because I live in the country without broadband. But anyway.
Okay. Well, I hate to ask you to repeat yourself, but
no,
please.
Yeah, I was just saying, I don't know if the city has done an assessment of its infrastructure, as in roads and bridges, but that would be something, yeah, they would want to do, particularly in the high flood zone areas.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Okay.
I think it could be useful to have neighborhood associations that kind of pool resources together in case of the various weather event things, so that there can be community responses that are hyper local.
Great, thank you. Yes. Okay. We can always bounce back into the main room if we don't have any further thoughts, but I don't want to cut you off any sooner than necessary. Any specific vulnerable buildings or areas in Charlottesville in particular, or vulnerable populations we haven't discussed? Okay, well, if there aren't any other comments, we can certainly go ahead and exit at the bottom right. There's a leave room button if we're ready. I'll leave that up to you. Okay. All right, Kale, well, I guess we'll go ahead and head back to the main room. Did you have any other thoughts for me?
No, all good.
Wonderful. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Denise Nelson, and we are going to start with the public health and well-being discussion. I'm going to open a whiteboard, if I can find it. Participants. Bear with me just a second. I'm going to get some tech support to find that whiteboard. I'm not seeing it pop up just yet. But what we're going to talk about is public health and well-being. And we want to consider how extreme heat, how increased precipitation and the variability in flooding, and how changing seasonal patterns will affect public health and well-being.
Start just to hang out or chat. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, yes, start thinking first about extreme heat and what things will be impacted, and maybe even specifically get as specific as you can, perhaps people waiting at a bus stop, whether it's students or adults, while they're waiting for that bus. If the heat, there'll be more likelihood of heat stroke in the future. That's a big concern for public health and well-being. Please think of other things like that and say them out loud. I am recording, so we'll be able to get a transcript, or type them into the chat. In the meantime, I'll send tech support a note to get the whiteboard up and running. Yes, go ahead, Jean.
Yeah, yesterday I was at a webinar that was taking place in Mesa, Arizona, and it was about extreme heat and what they were trying to do for it with trees. And they listed the health problems. It was 110 yesterday in Mesa, and they're having more and more 110 and up days. Heat stroke is one, suicide, erratic behavior of all kinds, including violence to other people, and maybe some of the others. There was a long list. Those are the ones that are on the top of my head. There are more.
Can you think of any sections of the city geographically, or community groups or neighborhoods that might suffer more?
Yeah, the neighborhoods that are tree deserts.
There you go.
There are 11 of them in our city.
Okay, so those are already identified somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Anybody else?
I'm thinking of construction workers. I know that the city has allows their utility workers and folks to start really early in the morning so that they don't have to be out there when it's the hottest part of the day. But I mean, it's going to be a point at which there is no easy part of the day to work outside. So that's hard for everybody.
Yes, that's a very good point. Other people that work outside, landscapers. Can you think of another group or another location?
I think kids who want to play outside.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we want to make sure they're safe. They do need that outdoor time, that time in the environment.
Are we just kind of popcorn, or should I wait for my turn?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So again, I believe that riders, right, people that ride the bus, so that they have the adequate support, such as bus stops and etc., for them to cope with different weather conditions. And I also think of drivers, actually, because that's my experience coming from a much warmer country. You suffer a lot in traffic conditions from when you're inside a car. Like the AC is probably not going to be enough, especially if you're facing like congestion with the smog and all the pollutants. That's really bad. If that can sound bad, but congestion with cold weather, it's much more bearable than congestion under a very high temperature. I promise you that.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
I'm remembering the horrible heat wave they had in Chicago a few years ago, that many people that were disabled or elderly and couldn't get around just died in their housing units from heat. They didn't have adequate air conditioning, and some were afraid to open windows because of the neighborhoods they lived in. And it was just a very dangerous starting point. And then to get the heat, they died. I don't remember the number, but it was shocking.
I think I'd like to say that in general, all of the current inequities will just be made more extreme, more difficult to resolve. And also in terms of psychological well-being, it's very difficult for people if they really can't go outside, if they cannot, for kids playing, but for people who walk their dogs or just take walks, as I do every day, that would be a real blow. I mean, I was very happy for a week when COVID made us all stop driving our cars. That was a great week for me because it was so quiet, but long term, it was pretty crappy. So I think it's important to think about the psychological impact of that kind of oppressiveness, that kind of heat.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And what do you think about increased precipitation and flash flooding and how that affects public health and well-being? What comes to mind for the city of Charlottesville?
And we've had some flash floods in our area.
There was some out in the county west of town where a couple actually drowned in their car because of the flooded road. And this was maybe 3 years ago.
It was fairly recent.
So do you think there needs to be some sort of alert system? How can we try to prevent that?
In my opinion, I think that yes, alert system is great, even though I think that we already have some sort of alert system that code red, which kind of, in my opinion, works well. But I would say that like years in ahead alert systems, such as mapping, like we have mapping of tree canopy, like what about mapping of flooding risk zones or something like that, and connect that with real estate, make it really clear with real estate market, and even make some decisions of areas that, hey, we should not be developing these areas, and actually we should, at a possible rate, consider evacuating certain areas. I don't know, just possible ideas.
Great.
Thank you.
I think it would be nice to know, I mean, I'm totally unprepared I live right downtown, and I know I've seen little mini floods since I've lived here for 5 years, but I'm totally unprepared for a flood. I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know what system is in place to help me, and how to contact that system. And I don't have a go bag, you know, wouldn't know what to take with me, and et cetera. I just feel I'm unprepared. And when I talk to my friends, they're unprepared too. They really haven't a clue. And many of them lost power this winter in the storm, and for extended periods of time. And they said they felt helpless. They didn't know what systems were in place, and they misjudged. They thought it would be a shorter time the power was down, so they didn't book a hotel for a whole week. They just booked it for one night, and then the hotel filled up, and then they had to go every night to a different hotel they spent their whole day trying to find a hotel for the next night. And they were really shaken by and they didn't know what system was in place, and no one alerted them really to how long it would be until they could get back in their home. So that's a kind of, I guess, citizen preparedness, which would be really nice to have help with.
Yes, I heard you talk about the preparedness, the education in advance, but it sounded like you were also mentioning communication during the flood, during this hazard,
Right.
and following to get people back into their houses.
Right.
Thank you. Martha, it looks like you're about to say something.
No, I'm just thinking.
Okay. Are you all able to see the whiteboard?
Yes.
And I believe
Yes.
you can scroll around, you can zoom to make it larger if you need to. It's just a big old board where we're throwing information.
Actually, we are supposed to use. Oh no, just you.
You can.
No, I just want to mention that one thing related to flooding, that it's not a risk of life-threatening, at least not immediate, or not risk to structures, but it is the fact that whenever you have flooding, it's very likely that you're going to have lots of pockets of water, stagnated water in many places. And again, that's highly related with mosquitoes and diseases. So I'm very concerned about that as well.
Yes. And when I think about the mosquitoes and diseases, I also think about the third hazard here, the third system that we're looking at, the changing seasonal conditions and the shifting or the lengthening of certain seasons, moving our frost-free date, making the summer longer, maybe the winter shorter, and how that will affect the insects and the plants.
I know I talked about this earlier, but again, I'd like to say that our public parks are an incredible asset to the community, and many of them have streams, creeks, the Rivanna River in them. And so when it's expensive to replace the Riverwalk, all of that has a cost. We count a lot without knowing it, I think, on the trees, for instance, in the parks, helping to offset the loss of tree cover because of increased development. If those parks begin flooding and losing their trees or becoming unusable for people, that's a big, again, sort of a well-being issue, as well as just from a practical standpoint. Those waters go right through neighborhoods. So I think that's a real issue, how to safeguard those public properties and increase their capacity, their carrying capacity in weather events like that.
Yes, thank you for that. Great. We have about a minute left. Oh, sorry.
On the subject of the flooding, I feel like when the city redoes its zoning, it's really got to get tough on that situation. It has appeared to me as an observer of that it's really lax about enforcing some of the high water issues, some of the flood zone issues. And in one case, an interested party who's an engineer just sort of reassessed the area where they wanted to build and got permission. And, you know, it's going to be lower income homes, and those people are the least prepared to pay for all the insurance and all the expenses of repair themselves. So we really need to get tough and stick to our guns on that. And we haven't started doing that yet. I don't know how you're going to write that one down, but.
Well, we're recording too, so thank you. And we did have a very similar workshop with city staff from many departments yesterday. And part of that was to collect information, but also to create a stronger network of people working together across departments for these common goals. Now, I think we just have about 15 seconds and we're going to be sent back to the big group, and then we'll have we'll be dispersed back out to new discussion groups on new community systems. Thank you for joining us here.
Looks like they must be wrapping up a good conversation.
Yeah, it's been real good. You guys have
Forestry
been a good group to work with. A lot of great input.
I love your friend there, Donna. Adorable.
She's just here for the breaks.
Thank you, Martha. Sorry we had to cut you off to leave the group.
That's okay.
Welcome back to our main session. So some good discussion going on for those other topics. And what I'd like to ask all of you about now, considering everything we were just talking about, we want to really hone in and get to what specific assets may have low adaptability, meaning it might not be able to function well if we were to have those climate impacts happen. And other assets may be able to function a little bit better. But if you think about it, what assets in particular would really have low adaptability where we need to focus efforts? Anyone want to mention any of those? And you can put them in chat as well. You know, what's really critical to be able to provide help to?
I could mention energy inefficient housing stock in the city. How are we going to cope with skyrocketing utility bills if the weather, as is predicted, gets extremely warm?
Yeah.
With these flooding events, there's usually a storm, and that brings a lot of wind. And the city just keeps having big branches falling down as well as little ones, but power goes out and sometimes stays out for a while. So a lot of places I've lived in, one section of Charlottesville that I used to live in, we did have underground power. And I really think that we should be pressing Dominion to do that throughout the city so that some of the outages will not occur. In fact, most of them would stop occurring.
Say residents relying on public transit, especially when extreme heat becomes more of an issue, and then also extreme storms.
I think it would be helpful. The city I lived in, they told you what trees were good for the city, not only for the climate, but the idea that you don't put a redwood tree in the middle of the city that belongs in the forest. So we could have lists. I mean, the city even would give everybody 2 trees for their front yard. In one city I lived in, that would only grow so tall, so you didn't have all these branches coming down.
Right. You all have very good thoughts and ideas.
Well, one of the things to avoid the branch situation she just mentioned is good maintenance of the trees. And I know that's a problem for low-income homeowners. First of all, many of them don't want trees because of the cost of upkeep. And we don't seem to have, at least I'm unaware that we have a fund which would take care of the maintenance and care of trees, which benefit the whole community, so that we can have them evenly distributed and not just in high-income neighborhoods.
I would like to build on that topic. I think it's a great idea, and I think that these funds for tree preserving or tree planting would be awesome if they were focused for the tree deserts that you mentioned before, Jean, so that we're really incentivizing more trees in the neighborhoods that need most, and particularly BIPOC and lower-income populations. And also on the tree topic, I think it's very important for us to have some sort of inventory that's a little bit more detailed than the ones that we have right now. So really talking about what types of trees we have in different places, particularly talking about power reliability, power outages, and etc. I do think it's very important for us to try to preventively to prevent outages by really kind of knowing what size of trees, what trees are kind of in risk situations near power lines, risk of fires, because for real, like in dry season with warmer temperatures, fires, people, like imagine like a city with lots of trees, fire by. So how can we prevent that, and how can we prevent outages for storms and etc.? So a better inventory would be necessary, I guess.
Wonderful.
I would throw out there as far as what are big risks are, making sure it's food security and water, particularly if your power is out. There's damage to get resupplied in a local grocery store. So you would want to have some kind of way for people to communicate that there was a need for those sort of things. I mean, it's kind of food, water, and probably medical supplies that could be critical if there's a severe storm with outages and lack of access to these things.
Great.
Martha's
following on the water idea is what I've seen in Florida a whole lot. You take one of these big 5-gallon things to the water filtration machine outside the grocery store, and it does cut down on the amount of wasted plastic all over the place. We don't see any of that here, at least I haven't where I shop. So I think it is a good move for solving the water problem.
Great. I just put in the chat, if you're not aware of it, FEMA has a website called ready.gov that does give citizens a lot of different ideas on how to prepare. Okay. Other thoughts? Go ahead.
I was going to say that the city, I believe our water supply is gravity fed. And so a power outage will not affect your ability to get water. Now, the quality of the water can be impacted. That's usually solved with boiling water. So we don't, but nobody in the city that I'm aware of has a well, which is really where power outages impact your ability to get water. That's just something I thought I'd mention that. And there are lots of lists of appropriate trees for plantings, native trees particularly. The tree stewards are a good resource, master gardeners. There's and the city forester will come to your home and will tell you what kind of tree you can plant, because he's done it for me. So at least the old one did. I don't know about the new one, but
I was going to say, do we have a forester at this point?
We do.
Okay.
For about a month.
Okay. I've been out of touch for about 3.
there you go.
Great. Great ideas. Okay.
I was recently using the ready.gov to look into making go bags when my granddaughter's here. And that can run into a lot of money, just putting together a go bag. And so I'm thinking that if we really want to have an equitable situation here, we need to start thinking of how are we going to fund the creation of emergency supplies in every household, including low-income households.
Or the placement of depots where those would be available to people that couldn't afford them.
I'd like to share a personal suggestion as well regarding what we are identifying as adaptative needs, as presenter Angelica, I guess, mentioned before. And I think one thing that I admire of the United States, in Brazil, we moved, the Europeans moved to a very warm country, and they wanted to keep the European cultures to a very strict manner, which made life impossible. Like wearing lots of clothes in Brazil and trying to eat like cod in Brazil was fairly impossible. Here in the United States, what I learned is that you adapt more to the local realities, pumpkins, sweet potato, corn, and etc. And you made that local reality your culture. So I really appreciate and admire that level of adaptiveness. And I think that to a certain extent, we need to assess better what are the things that we have been used to, but we can change to a new reality. For example, vineyards. It's beautiful to have them around here, but perhaps it's not something that we would die as a community if they're not. Like, really, I appreciate the vineyard industry. I know it's important, but putting a balance, like we need to assess what's kind of doable and what we cannot live without.
So as with 2 hours goes by quickly when we're talking about all the things that we've been talking about, but we have in our last 10 minutes, I'd like to ask Susan to talk just for a few minutes about next steps, and then we'll do a special closing.
All right, thank you. So for next steps, up there for you guys. So this is the top 2 in the upper right, are boxes that were part of that timeline graphic from before. So we will put all this together. Angelica will combine the results from the survey with all of your comments from today, what we had from the previous steps in the process, and put all that together into our a memo of basically the results from our climate vulnerability assessment. We will then get that online. There will be an open comment period for that, after which we will incorporate comments, finalize it, and publish that as our final climate vulnerability assessment report. In order to keep in touch, we will, any of the email addresses that we got from your registration tonight, we'll reach out to you to let you know as this process moves forward. But in addition to that, if you're interested in keeping in touch with anything else that comes up down the road from within our climate program, whether it's looking at climate adaptation or it's looking at the climate action plan focused on greenhouse gas emission reductions, I encourage you to sign up for our climate action news flashes. You can do that at charlottesville.gov/notify-me. You scroll down, go to the news flash section, look for climate action. And then anytime we send out a kind of news alert about things, you'll either get an email or a text message depending on which option you choose when you're registering for that. And that way you can keep in touch as we, new programs, volunteer opportunities, new reports, any of that stuff comes out going down the road. Additionally, materials from this and past materials from the process are online at charlottesville.gov/climate-plan. So please take a look at that. We also have materials from our greenhouse gas reduction climate action plan process there as well. And then from that section of the website, you can link to anything else from our climate program. One other thing I did also want to acknowledge is that when we sent out our save the date for this, we found out that C3 and Livable Seaville had planned to do an event tonight. Their team had more flexibility on that. It was climate friendly zoning. They had more flexibility to shift in a way that we did not. And so they very graciously offered to shift their event to earlier this week on Tuesday evening. And timing ended up working out that they hadn't done their big marketing push-up, so they were able to then get all that marketing out over the weekend to, a couple weekends ago to get everyone on board with the new date. They did record that and it is available on their YouTube page. So I do encourage you all to also go and take a look at what those two organizations have around climate. And that was a 1-hour event that they've got it posted up on YouTube. With that, I will go ahead and hand it back over to Linda. But I did also just want to say thank you again for all of your time and contributions and your thoughts tonight and your active participation in this process, but also the contributions it makes to Charlottesville as a community going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susan. And if you want, you could put those into the chat. You can put those links if you know them for the organization meeting from Tuesday. Be great. So in closing with all of us, we live in a really amazing community. And I'd like to ask you to put into chat, what do you most appreciate about living here? And feel free to speak it out loud as well as adding it into that chat. But what do you appreciate most about living here? And just to start that off, I really appreciate being able to have such a sense of community, going to the downtown mall, for instance, on Friday nights for Fridays After 5. Just that sense, I feel like I'm on vacation at home and I feel the warmth of it.
Having lived in Northern Virginia for a number of years, I'm very happy to have a community that I can move from one place to another, generally in under 20 minutes. Northern Virginia, there's no place other than your neighborhood that you can get in 20 minutes.
And the walkability to downtown, I'm reading some from the chat, and the river view and nature and water, the variety of cultural activities, walkability and community, and it's a cosmopolitan and diverse city. Anyone else? What you appreciate about living here? Okay. Well, thank you so much. The proximity to the mountains, the ocean, and DC. And the wineries. And our farmers market too. The farmers markets, there's quite a few. People do care about ensuring that we grow in an equitable, environmentally sustainable way. It's so great to be part of that and to be part of this tonight, to be able to have these discussions. So we'll wrap everything together and hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and have a great weekend. And we'll stay on for a moment with the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to put something in chat, go ahead and do so. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks, Martha.